It was an ordinary afternoon when Laura, a 43-year-old holistic therapist, met a young woman who was carrying an unusual restlessness. The girl, in her early 20s, showed no signs of depression or trauma. But she described in a calm and steady voice a persistent feeling of having lived too much. She said that when she looked at the people around her, it was as if she were watching a replay, as if the world were stuck in a loop, and she, for some reason, was in the final scene of a movie that had gone on too long. Laura, accustomed to reports of existential anxiety, was intrigued. The patient did not speak of sadness. She spoke of lucidity, of a silent certainty. I am here just to close something. This story, although it may seem isolated, is far from unique. There are thousands of people around the world who carry, even without understanding, the feeling that this is their last life. A subtle perception that the cycle is closing. And it is not about giving up, but about completeness. An almost sacred feeling of mission accomplished, even if the mission itself was never clearly explained. Be a part of the kingdom of the chosen. Subscribe to the channel today and comment "I believe" below as a symbol that you accept your role in this great transition. Let your energy be counted among the chosen. The time is now. Now here is the question that few have the courage to ask. What if some people were actually living their last incarnation? What if there is a point at which the soul not only evolves, but frees itself? The answer may seem bold, but it is anchored in ancient traditions. From the Vedas, which describe moksha, final liberation, to the readings of the mystic Edgar Cayce, there are indications that human consciousness is not eternally trapped in the cycle of birth and death. According to Cayce, some souls reach a point where they are no longer bound by karma, but are guided by a calm and intuitive presence. Interestingly, a study by Dr. Jim Tucker of the University of Virginia documented more than 2,500 cases of children who had memories of previous lives, many of which involved statements like, "I won't be back after this life." This pattern raised a new hypothesis. Is there a cycle of spiritual completion? Science is still in its infancy when it comes to understanding this, but human experience has always brought signs, symptoms of an ancient soul that is on the verge of transcending this plane. If you feel like the world is not your permanent home, if sometimes it feels like you're just finishing chapters, not starting new ones, if there is a silent lucidity about your presence here, so maybe, just maybe, you are among the few who are at the end of the line, not because they failed, but because they delivered. In the next few minutes, we will explore the 6 clear signs that indicate that this life may be your last, not as an end, but as the beginning of a new state of existence. A way of returning to what you have always been, whole. Are you ready to recognize the signs of your own awakening? Your journey is just beginning. It's time to regain your strength and build a new path. Subscribe to the channel and be part of this community that is awakening to the truth. Signal 1. The silent reminder. Transcendence is not a destination, it is a state. Have you ever noticed that at some point in your life, your greatest pursuits start to lose steam? What once seemed fundamental, status, success, validation, suddenly no longer moves you with the same urgency. It's not fatigue, it's clarity. This kind of profound transformation does not come from outside. It is not caused by a specific event or some religious doctrine. It arises silently, like an internal breeze that blows from time to time, reminding you of something you cannot name but feel. In many ancient spiritual traditions, this phase is known as the final stage of incarnation. In Hinduism, it is called moksha, liberation from the cycle of birth and death, known as samsara. In Buddhism, it is then nirvana, the end of suffering caused by the illusion of the I. In mystical Christianity, there is the concept of returning to the Father's house, that is, to the divine essence. But you don't have to follow a religion to realize that something has changed. People who are at this stage often experience a natural reduction of desire. This does not mean that they lose interest in life. On the contrary, they begin to live it with more presence, but without the weight of urgency, as if they had already tasted all the flavors and were now savoring the silence. This type of consciousness has been extensively studied by Edgar Cayce, who between 1910 and 1945 performed more than 14,000 readings in a trance state, in which he accessed the spiritual field of his clients. In several of these readings, Cayce described souls who were close to completing their journey on Earth. According to him, these people felt a special kind of homesickness, not out of sadness, but out of recognition, like someone returning home after many journeys. Science is gradually beginning to consider this type of phenomenon. Swiss psychiatrist Elisabeth Kübler-Ross in the 1970s interviewed hundreds of terminally ill patients and discovered that many of them spoke of a sense of mission accomplished, even without being able to explain why. And this feeling was more common in people who had faced their lives with awareness and introspection. Transcendence in this context, it is not something that is achieved with effort. It is not a trophy. It is a natural process of spiritual maturation. It happens when the soul understands that it is not the body, nor the name, nor the profession, nor the history lived. It is when it perceives itself as something greater, a consciousness that is only experiencing this human form for a limited time. This is why many people at this stage report feeling like they are merely observers of their own lives. They participate in experiences, but without getting caught up in them. They do not live out of obligation, nor do they react with despair. They are present but not caught up in illusions. Maybe you've already felt this, a kind of inner silence that appears in the middle of the rush, a lightness that appears even in the midst of problems, a wordless certainty that you is not here to begin, but to end. This is the mark of real transcendence. It requires no struggle, no effort. It is the awakening of a memory that you were always whole, but you forgot for a while. It's time to regain your strength and build a new path. If this video resonates with you, don't stop here. Click subscribe now and discover the next step in your transformation. Signal 2. The silent awakening. When you realize that reality is not so real after all. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that everything you believe to be solid, permanent, and absolute is actually temporary, conditioned, and relative. We are not talking about a conspiracy theory or an empty mystical idea, but rather a real process experienced by thousands of people around the world, called awakening of consciousness. This awakening doesn't happen with fireworks or dramatic revelations. It comes quietly, like a recurring thought that keeps coming back, even when you try to ignore it. Suddenly, things that used to make sense no longer do. The certainties that guided your decisions start to feel shaky, and you start to notice something strange, not about the things, but about the way you see them. Many describe this as the feeling of waking up inside a dream, a progressive clarity that everything around you works as a grand performance. Social roles, power structures, personal goals, even the very I you always thought you were. This is the point at which the identity begins to be seen as a temporary construction. The idea that we are just a name, a profession, a body, begins to crumble. The ego, which for so long guided our choices, loses strength. And the most curious thing? This does not create a crisis, it creates relief. In the field of theoretical physics, scientists such as Nick Bostrom and Donald Hoffman have been proposing models in which the reality we perceive may be just a representation, an interface adapted to survival but not to the truth. In other words, what you see is not what really is. You see only what is useful for navigating this world, not what lies beneath the surface. On the spiritual plane, traditions such as Indian Vedanta, Chinese Taoism, and even Western Gnostic teachings have always held the idea that matter is illusory and that the true essence of existence cannot be touched, only perceived with awakened consciousness. This awakening also manifests itself in subtle ways in everyday life. For example, situations that previously caused strong emotional reactions are now viewed with calm detachment. An almost intuitive perception of hidden patterns in events emerges. It starts to be noticed synchronicities, those coincidences so precise that they seem programmed, like thinking about someone and them calling seconds later. These signs are not random. They are reflections that your consciousness is shifting in frequency, moving away from total identification with the body and mind, and reconnecting with a deeper dimension of being. And when that happens, everything changes. You're still in the same body with the same name, walking the same streets, but something in you no longer holds on to the illusion. The world keeps spinning, but you no longer spin with it in the same way. This is the true awakening. It is not adding knowledge, but removing the fog. It's not about gaining something new, but remembering what was always there. If you've ever felt like your identity is just a costume you've been wearing for a while, you may already be going through this process, even if it's silent. Share this knowledge with the world. Together we can spread this message and help more people become free. Subscribe to the channel and send this video to anyone who needs to hear this truth. Sign 3. When the cycle ends, the release of patterns. There are times in life when something simply stops. An old anguish, a toxic dynamic, an emotional addiction that seemed impossible to break. And the most curious thing is that the end does not come through effort or resistance. It just happens. As if something inside you, wiser than your mind, says, "This is no longer necessary." This type of transformation is not random. It could be a sign that you are in an advanced stage of karmic release. But what is karma after all? Contrary to popular belief that associates it with punishment, karma, in Eastern traditions such as Hinduism and Buddhism, refers to a set of actions, choices, and learning accumulated throughout life. Each experience generates a consequence not as retaliation, but as an opportunity for balance and understanding. When the soul is still stuck in intense desires, deep hurts, or cycles of attachment, it is naturally drawn to new experiences where it can revisit and integrate these emotions. This is why some situations seem to repeat themselves. Different people, but the same conflicts. New beginnings, but old pains. Karmic liberation happens when these patterns are no longer fed, not through denial, but through integration. You no longer need the lesson because you have finally understood what it was trying to show you. In the early 1980s, Edgar Cayce, in his readings on the soul and incarnation, already said that certain individuals experienced an accelerated closing of emotional ties. According to him, this happened when the consciousness became capable of absorbing the essence of the experience without being tied to the drama involved. Psychologically, transpersonal psychotherapy observed similar phenomena. Patients report that certain traumas, fears, and compulsions simply lose their weight. Not that they disappear completely, but they lose the ability to control them. The person stops reacting. They see, acknowledge, and choose not to repeat. Have you noticed this? Maybe a stressful relationship ended without a fight. Or a criticism that once would have brought you down is now just a distant sound. Or maybe that old pattern of self-sabotage has finally lost its power. These are all signs that the wheel of repetition is slowing down. Liberation does not come with fanfare. It comes with silence. It comes with neutrality. It comes with peace. And it is this state of serenity in the face of what previously unbalanced you that reveals you are not escaping the cycles. You have transcended them. What once held you back now just passes you by, like a weightless memory. This is where the soul stops returning out of obligation. And if he returns, it is by choice, not because of a pending matter. If you have been experiencing natural closures, feeling less of a need to control or resist, then perhaps you are witnessing the final release of the knots that kept you tied to this plane. To make sure you don't miss any of God's messages, click the subscribe button. Write "I'm ready" in the comments and start aligning your energy with the transformation that is coming. Sign 4. When the universe answers you, the world reflects what you are. Have you ever thought about someone and then had that person text you? Or had a seemingly random idea and then the same day saw something related to the topic appear before you as if the world was listening to your thoughts? These episodes, often called meaningful coincidences, are much more than mere happenstance. For those who are more spiritually aware, these occurrences reveal a subtle truth. The external world is a mirror of the internal state. This idea is not new. In fact, It is present in several philosophical and spiritual traditions. In Hermeticism, for example, we find the maxim, as above, so below, as within, so without. In other words, what happens within you directly influences what manifests around you. But how does this happen in practice? As awareness expands, one begins to realize that one's emotions, intentions, and thoughts are not isolated. They interact with the field of reality. Modern science also moves in this direction. The unified field theory, explored by physicists such as David Bohm, suggests that everything is interconnected at a fundamental level. What we think, feel, and believe is not limited to the brain. It vibrates, echoes, and reverberates at subtle levels of existence. This would explain why unlikely events begin to align with emotional states or internal changes. For example, when someone decides to break a negative pattern and open themselves to new possibilities, unexpected doors open. The right people appear. Useful information appears without searching. Solutions emerge naturally. These occurrences are called synchronicities, and they are not isolated mystical signs, but a response from reality to a new inner alignment. Edgar Cayce, during his readings in the 1920s and 30s, described this phenomenon as one of the strongest signs that the soul is awakening. He said that when the soul reconnects with its essence, it stops reacting to the world and begins to co-create with him. This co-creation, however, is not forced. It is not about mentalizing to get what you want. It is about realizing that when you change within, the surrounding scenario naturally adapts. When you connect with tranquility, the chaos outside loses strength. When you cultivate gratitude, more reasons to be thankful begin to appear. None of this is magic in the fanciful sense. It is resonance, a vibrational field that responds, subtly and precisely, to its predominant energy. If your life has become organized in an almost inexplicable way, if answers have arrived even before the questions, if what seemed unlikely now happens smoothly, it is possible that you are experiencing their revelation that the universe was never separate from you. It is part of who you are, and when your soul aligns with your truth, reality stops being random and becomes collaborative. What you feel shapes what you live. If you feel this calling within you, subscribe to the channel and write "I am chosen" in the comments. Declare that you are ready to receive what is already in store for you. Sign 5. What if you have already done what you came to do? Not all lives are created equal. Some are meant to be learned. Others are meant to be repaired. But there are those that exist two close cycles. If you've come this far and realized that much of what has been described resembles your own trajectory, the coincidences that accumulate, the tiredness for no reason, the peace in the midst of chaos, the lack of interest in what once seemed essential, perhaps you're facing something bigger than you imagined, the end of the wheel. It's not about having powers, visions, or answers to everything. Quite the opposite. The soul's final return to this plane is marked by a strange calm, an absence of urgency, a kind of spiritual maturity that doesn't shout, just observes. While many are still running, you slow down. While most are looking for something outside, you recognize that you already carry everything inside. And that's not arrogance, it's clarity. Life stops being a battlefield. The same mistakes don't happen again. The same people don't have the same effect on you anymore. You feel less of a need to prove something. And above all, you no longer feel that constant restlessness for something more. You are here. You know you are present, but you also know that you do not belong here entirely. The feeling of a mission accomplished appears in the gestures, in the decisions, in the pauses. It is like finishing a book that has left a deep impression on you, and closing the last page with gratitude, not with attachment. If there is something that defines this final moment, it is thesalent detachment. You don't have to run away from life, but you're no longer trapped by it either. And when something no longer controls you, it no longer defines you either. Perhaps you have lived dozens, hundreds of existences. And this one now is just the one that concludes all the others. Not with drama, nor with glory. but with understanding. So instead of asking what is left to achieve, perhaps the real question is, have you already experienced what you needed to experience? If the answer is yes, you don't need to do anything, not even going anywhere. Just keep going. With presence, with truth. The soul that ends its cycle does not leave. It remains, but in another form. The awakening continues. If this video opened your eyes to truths you had never seen before, imagine what else you can discover. Subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications so you don't miss any life-changing content.